That sounds far more glamorous than it is, and I guess the answer is if you stick around long enough, you can do more things. But the other reality is, when I decided to go back to do my PhD, it's obviously late stage, I never saw the work that I did in the community supporting people with epilepsy in the literature, to be quite honest. And it's really important to me that we can encapsulate that voice in more of what we do in supporting people with epilepsy. So, I've been asked to speak about the empowerment of people, and let me just figure out how to use this. Where do I have to press it to? Do you know how to do this? Okay, perfect. Okay. So, my back slide that just went ahead tells you that I do not have any financial sponsors or any conflict of interest for this talk. So we did refer to the International Bureau for Epilepsy at the very beginning. It is the partner organization to the League. The League is the group that is the International League Against Epilepsy, Helen Cross, and the group here is the one that supports the clinicians, and I am in the side that is there to actually empower people with epilepsy. So it is actually an aspiration of ours to advocate globally for epilepsy and to support provision by empowering. Now I thought, oh, here's my slides, great, sorry. Okay, I can't even read it, that's so far down. That's the disadvantage of age. Anyway, so, yay, thank you. So I was invited to speak today, and I'm excited to speak today about empowerment, but I did worry, and I was telling this to my table at lunch, that a lot of people might think this is kind of a fluffy topic, and not near as serious or as important as talking about other aspects of this IGAP. The reason that this is not a serious topic is that in many countries, in particular lower and middle income countries, the only way in my mind that epilepsy will ever get on the radar of health policymakers is through the voice of the community. So, this one? Perfect. Okay, for goodness sakes. It's the green button on top. Okay. Okay, so let me get back into my stride here. I can't overstate how excited we were at the IBE in May 2020 when 194 member states, including Canada, endorsed the IGAP, which is the Intersectoral Global Action Plan on Epilepsy. And this global plan was a validation of the need for the people that I support. Within this global plan is target 5.1 and 5.2. And 5.1 and 5.2 are specific to epilepsy. Global plan, so 5.1, I am really struggling here with having it so far away. So global plan 5.1 speaks specifically to the needs of the healthcare organization, but 5.2 speaks about the needs of people with epilepsy. Okay. One of the guiding principles in this plan, and there are 7 of them, is the empowerment of people with lived experience. So what's important here is this guiding principle explicitly states that the social, economic, and educational needs and freedoms of persons and families affected by neurological disorders should be promoted, prioritized, and protected. Why does this matter? Well, for us, it is validation that the person with epilepsy is an expert in designing systems for their own care. But the other reason that this is vitally important is without the empowerment of people with epilepsy, we may never see epilepsy on the agenda of many governments. And I'll give you quite a personal example of that. We were at the WHO in Geneva, and we were talking to member states, which are governments, about the need for a plan. And I remember sitting with some of the health ministers from Africa. And Africa has the greatest treatment gap for epilepsy and the greatest need, in my opinion, worldwide. And many of these health policymakers said, you know what? We don't even have an issue with epilepsy in our community. I said, well, I don't understand what you mean. The comment came that I have never, ever been asked to to improve care for people with epilepsy, and I've never met anybody with epilepsy. And that became kind of a rallying call for somebody like me, who was thinking, you know what, if stigma is so burdensome in these countries, nobody's going to come forward until we make it safe and preventable. And this is what guiding principle number E does. It says to people with epilepsy that they are entitled to come forward and to help to develop a system of care that's meaningful for them. So within the IGAP, there are 5 strategies, and there are recommendations for our governments and for individuals and for organizations. But I've highlighted in purple the strategies that I believe are imperative for people to be empowered. So if we are going to prioritize and change advocacy, policy plans, and legislation, you're going to need a very strong group of individuals to work on that. So the IGAP includes proposed actions for governments and proposed actions for the Secretariat, which is the WHO, for national partners like the CLAE and the CEA, and international partners. But the reality is, the IGAP is only going to be implemented if we collectively look at how we're going to do this together. So, action point 152, I pulled this directly out of the IGAP, and it talks about people with epilepsy and the organizations that represent them should be empowered and involved in advocacy, policy, planning, legislation, service provision, monitoring, and research. So how do we do that? Well, we all know strong advocates. So the one at the top left I put in, that's Francesca Sophia. She is the president of the IBE, and what motivates her to support the work she does is her daughter Beatrice, and Beatrice has drug refractory epilepsy. So her whole reason to be an empowered advocate for epilepsy is her daughter. Down at the bottom we have Gardner Lapham. Gardner is an American who lost a 5-year-old child to SUDEP. And so her whole reason to be engaged in epilepsy work and to be an advocate is so that no other family has to have that same devastation as she had. And then we got Cassidy Megan, a very famous Canadian on the right. Now Cassidy Megan was the founder of Purple Day. And when you ask Cassidy, why did you found Purple Day? She said, well, I had epilepsy, and I didn't know anybody else did. And my mom said, why don't you go to school and start talking about it? And if you think of what she did, she created a whole movement, didn't she? She created a movement of advocates and empowered people across the world who are willing to come out and to talk about their epilepsy. But in some and so I just wanted to point out something that I think is really vitally important. In Canada and in the United States, you have a third sector, this charitable sector that I represent, and we have paid staff. So we are able to take things like activities like Purple Day or priorities like the IGAP and try to keep it on the radar of governments. But as you move throughout our region, in particular to the English-speaking Caribbean and down into Latin America, these epilepsy organizations are run by parents of drug refractory kids, and they're run by stakeholders, and they don't always have the tools or the time or the confidence or the competence to be strong advocates. So one of the things the IBE is doing is developing materials to support this group. So I'll share some of the materials that we've put together. We did a series of health diplomacy e-learning webinars that we have online. So what is that? It talks about how do you make an appointment with a policymaker? How do you discuss things with them? How do you plan to do that? What's the best way forward? What does it mean when they give you this answer? So that's all in the health diplomacy series. We also developed a series of toolkits, and these two that I point out here are to help people in Africa. And in each, and we'll be revising it for every region. But what's important about the toolkits is they offer information strategies, examples, templates to assist in crafting effective advocacy approaches. And they're not meant to be a standalone tool. Instead, they're to provide practical prompts for reflection, and basic advocacy. So my point here is the IBE recognizes that we need to clone Gardner Lapham and Francesca Sophia and Cassidy Megan, and we need to have a huge global group of people who have the skills to be advocates if we're going to see this change. So within the toolkits, we've made them very user-friendly. We have templates. We have examples of how to do this, and we're continually doing training workshops so people feel more comfortable. I was very excited in September of this year that we were able to launch a toolkit for use in the region of the Americas. And this is a really nice example of intersectoral approach. We wrote and published this toolkit in partnership with the Pan American Health Organization. When we went to launch, they said, well, we'll host the launch. They had 500 people registered to attend this workshop. We could not have had that as an IBE alone. So just the sheer reach from partnering with this organization was huge. They also simultaneously put the webinar in English, Spanish, and Portuguese and fielded questions in all 3 languages. And in the end, we had representation at this webinar from over 22 countries. So this is what the IGAP can help us to do. It can help us increase opportunities and collaboration and intersectoral approaches that we never could have done on our own. So, IBE also has a Global Leaders Series where they're picking people from all over the world to represent IBE, and every one of the committees now is governed by a group of people with epilepsy and versus people who have a career in epilepsy. And I think that's going to strengthen what we do strongly. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how we've really soared thinking about this intersectoral approach. One is from the Epilepsy Foundation. So each year they have a day on the Hill, so a day in Washington, D.C., where they send youth to talk to elected officials. And I think this is a brilliant idea, because these kids are great messengers and far more likely to be listened to and far less likely to be challenged. In the United States right now, half of the states have approved seizure-safe schools, which is a strategy that these kids are trying to bring forward. Second example comes from Ontario. In Ontario, we needed an intersectoral approach to get Policy 161 approved. So what's Policy 161? It was initiated by civil society and healthcare providers, but it's basically all school-age children with one of 4 prevalent medical conditions, diabetes, anaphylaxis, asthma, or epilepsy, are guaranteed to have a plan of care, not only for their safety, but for the administration of medicines. This is a huge triumph for Ontario and for Ontario schools. But I want to underscore it could not have happened without an intersectoral approach. Epilepsy alone wouldn't have done this. We needed to work with diabetes, anaphylaxis, asthma to get this approved. And with this came mandatory training on epilepsy for all teachers in the province of Ontario and mandatory plan of care for all kids with epilepsy within this province. And that is a triumph for us that would be something we can celebrate under the IGAP and something that could be replicated in all the provinces of Canada, but shared with people around the world. So we continue to look at the needs of people with epilepsy to make sure that IBE is representing their needs. So right now you'll see a QR code at the CEA booth where you're welcome to fill out a global epilepsy needs study and give your opinion on that. So I got off to a very, very rocky start, and I had this really strange label piece in there. And the label piece was meant to signify to us that we can have a whole bunch of blocks that can sit on the floor and do nothing. But if you look at the IGAP as a public house plan of care, there's something in that for everybody that's at this conference right now. And if you think of the principles of working together and empowering people with epilepsy, we can build some pretty great things. We can build great healthcare systems, and we can build great social care systems for people with epilepsy. And that goes beyond the medical management of this condition to include what people with epilepsy want you to include, which is their life in their community. They want to be accepted in school, they want to be accepted in work, accepted in their community, and live healthy and vibrant lives. And so the IGAP gives us that promise, but it won't happen if we don't put those blocks together. And so thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of people with epilepsy.
Thank you